Hello fellow YouTubers, and welcome to episode 19. Reading my first self-published novel, Aggravation. If I look a little bit red, it's not because I've been out in the sun lime trimming, although I have, and a lot of it too, but I've got a problem with the lighting. I changed the bulb over my desk, and it's a 20 watt fluoro bulb, and it's made me look a little bit red. Anyhow, so be it. You scared the living daylights out of Julian. That's what. I most certainly did not. Holding up a hand to fend off a rebuke, Clyde continued. I haven't been outside this house for 2 days, let alone anywhere near Julian. So instead of jumping the gun and storming over here, it would have been worth your while to ask your son what happened. You're a liar. And you are a psychopath in serious need of professional help. And with that said, Clyde closed the door in her face. The confrontation had a twofold effect on Clyde. First and foremost, he was feeling invigorated. Still stiff and sore, yes, but on a high nevertheless. Secondly, he felt like writing, an urge that had deserted him of late. And not before time, he muttered. During the course of the next 4 days, Clyde and Sandy regained their health and well-being. And Clyde finally finished his latest novel, We All Have a Story to Tell, dedicating it to Harriet and Henrietta MacArthur, two women who, if still alive, could tell a story like no other. There was, however, one thing still missing before he could send his manuscript away, and that was Louise Mapleton's website address. He hadn't heard a peep from her, even though he hadn't been unable to have his customary lunch last Monday at the cafe, and it surprised him. He had thought that maybe she would pay a cursory visit, or at least phone to inquire the reason for his absence. After all, they are friends, and that's what friends do. At least that's what he would do. Still, there could be and probably were many reasons why she hadn't done so. But if one of those reasons was because she hadn't organised her website and was avoiding him because of it, he might just call the whole thing off because of her lack of commitment. Next Monday, he would find out one way or the other. At around 10 Friday night, while Clyde and Sandy were watching television, an extraordinary event was about to unfold that would put a stop to the outrageous behaviour of the town's resident thumpers and their drunken revelry once and for all. When the noise began in earnest, as Clyde and Sandy expected it would, there was no need for them to phone the police to lodge a complaint, as they had done so many times in the past, for both were well aware of what was going to happen. They had no idea what the sisters had planned, but because of the numbers at these congregations, they expected it would be something befitting a blockbuster movie. Only in this case the special effects wouldn't be man-made and computer-generated. Clyde had asked Sandy if he wanted to witness the event, but Sandy had said he had more than enough of the supernatural to last him a dozen lifetimes. Clyde, on the other hand, had seriously considered doing exactly that. But in the end, he had decided that maybe it would be wise to keep his distance. He was more than confident that no physical harm would come to those gathered at the hands of the sisters. But who can tell what might happen during the chaos that would surely follow their appearance? On this Friday night, as was usual, 5 vehicles were parked close to the solitary rubbish bin in the Trafalgar River Reserve parking area. A single fluorescent tube mounted high on a wooden pole was the only source of light in an otherwise dark environment, casting a circle of light about 20 metres in diameter. To someone alone, the light would have been comforting, but to the 10 that were there it was but a convenience. The 5 vehicles, however, weren't parked nose to the knee-high single-rail barricade, but rather arranged in a circular formation, and doors wide open, so all and sundry had access to the interior of the vehicles and the individual sound systems. All 6 young men and 4 young women were standing in a rough circle close to the noses of the 5 vehicles, drinking beer and bashing their heads against an invisible wall to the beat of the thumping noise. Shane Rawlinson, the owner of the green Holden utility, and who Clyde couldn't assign a look-alike to because he couldn't think of anyone who was that obnoxious, was holding his girlfriend Shana crossed close to his left side. In order from his right stood Doug Larson, owner Silver Mazda 4-door, Cheryl Lamont, Alyssa Shannon, Harley Sloan, owner Orange Holden Utility, Paul Young, owner Purple Celica 2-door, Brittany Lewis, Wayne Thomas and Darryl Johnson, owner Metallic Blue Subaru 4-door. To all 9, Shane Rawlinson could do anything and no wrong. Such was their admiration for him. So when a bright light low in the night sky to the east was noticed by Harley Sloan, he sought the advice of his mentor. "Hey, Shane," he said, "what do you reckon that is?" pointing to the light. Shane ceased banging his head against the invisible wall, looked in the direction of Harley's finger, glugged from his can of beer, then said in no uncertain terms, "How the fuck do I know?" And everyone laughed. "Hey, you fuckwit," Shane slurred to Harley. "Get me another fucking beer and turn the music up." Harley did what he was told, and except for Harley they all laughed again. During the course of the next few minutes 15 cans of beer were consumed. Shane wet-kissed his girlfriend as his hands wandered all over her body as Cheryl and Alyssa looked on wishing they were her. Wayne turned his back on the gathering and urinated. Darryl tried it on with Brittany, who wasn't interested, while Harley, Paul and Doug smoked and just didn't give a fuck. Then the fluorescent light went out, plunging the scene into darkness. "What the fuck?" Shane blurted out, and they all laughed. This time, however, their laughs were of the nervous kind regardless of their state of intoxication. And Shana, although close to her hero, suggested it might be a good idea to turn the headlights on. "Hey, Harley fuckknuckle," Shane shouted. "Turn your fucking headlights on." But Harley complained. "I'll flatten my battery if I do that." Shane, "So?" "Well, start the engine for Christ's sake." "Geez, do I have to do your thinking for you, you stupid prick?" More laughter. Again, Harley did what he was told. But the moment the engine roared into life, the next moment it stopped. And no matter how many times Harley cranked the engine, it refused to start. "Good God almighty," Shane grumbled, shaking his head. "The fucking morons flooded the engine. Can't you do anything right, you useless son of a bitch fuckwit?" More laughter. Harley, contrary to Shane's constant ridicule, wasn't a fuckwit in the truest sense. He was a dull bludger who sold amphetamines to boost his income, drank to excess, smoked like a chimney, was a good-for-nothing lazy layabout who didn't care what tomorrow might have in store for him, to be sure. But then so are all the others. But he wasn't a fuckwit, and he knew he hadn't flooded the engine. He also knew that there was something funny about that light that was now coming toward them, and he didn't like it one little bit. And because he felt uneasy about the light, he decided to stay right where he was, close the doors, and lose himself to the deafening sound, and to hell with the rest of them. But as Harley sat back in the driver's seat absorbing the thump of his state-of-the-art, best illegal money could buy stereo system, thinking why his much-loved $40,000 utility that his mother had bought for him wouldn't start, the light that was coming was now right above his friends, and that's when Harley desperately wanted to be somewhere else. And when his and the other 4 vehicle stereo systems shut down, and all was as quiet could be, Harley popped a couple of red and white amphetamine capsules into his mouth and swallowed hard, while at the same time Shane shouted, What the fuck is going on here? And as he looked on through bloodshot eyes, at the sight of his friends standing like statues, heads back, shielding their eyes with a hand as they looked up at the brilliant white light that bathed them. Then quick as a wink the light went out, and with it all 10 were left with a lingering retinal aberration which, at first, all 10 thought was the reason they saw ghost-like figures floating before them. Harley, totally freaked out, clamped his eyes shut, vowing that, come hell or high water, nothing would force him to open them. Hell was only moments away. Meanwhile, the 9 on the outside were rubbing their eyes in an attempt to rid themselves of the ghost-like images. And it was then a deafening scream forced their hands from their eyes to their ears, and they cowered in fright. With the scream, Harley flinched and opened his eyes. And his first impression of what he saw, he thought must be on account of the drugs, and he was hallucinating. For God knows he had seen some weird things while under the influence. But when Shane looked up and screamed at the sight floating just above him, Harley knew he wasn't seeing things. And when the others looked up because of Shane's scream and saw the same thing, they screamed also. Victoria MacArthur had sent the black smoke demon that was her husband scurrying away. So the sight of her as she was then, arms spread wide like a white manta ray, mouth impossibly agape, was enough to instill terror on this pathetic group of mere mortals. And when her 2 daughters suddenly appeared, one to each side, they gave the appearance of this ghostly spectre as that of sprouting wings with faces. The sight too much for them to bear, and they wept and huddled together, seeking safety in numbers, but wetting themselves for the fear that enveloped them. Ooh, scary. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, the 5 stereo systems came to life with the incessant thump they usually relished. But this time the noise was a violation to their senses, a rape of body and mind that involuntarily made them jump in fright, and their racing hearts skip a beat. And then their legs gave way and they fell on their knees to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. But at the same time this was going on the outside, Harley was weeping with fright too, his hands white-knuckled as he gripped the steering wheel like grim death, heart in his mouth, a lather of cold sweat, wanting to but too terrified to open the door and take to his heels. And when the stereo system erupted with a sound, he shot up off of the seat, impacting his head hard on the roof, and he pissed himself, then dropped onto the seat and threw up a mixture of beer and bile all over his urine-soaked crotch, upper legs, floor, steering wheel and instrument panel, and yet his hands never left the steering wheel. All of the 10 desperately wanted the noise to stop, and when it did, as suddenly as it had started, they found the eerie silence as, if not more so, disturbing. Harley, although a stinking putrid mess, hadn't taken his eyes off the floating winged apparition. So he was the first to see the wings separate. And with the separation he realised that they weren't wings, but 2 individual entities, and one of them was heading directly toward him. Peeling his hands from the steering wheel, he then desperately tried to start the engine, but to no avail. Nevertheless, he continued to crank the engine, looking up with furtive glances to gauge the distance of the approaching apparition, then down at the hand clasping the ignition key. Up, down, the only sound that of the click of the starter motor and the guttural cough of the engine. Then in a matter of moments was only the click, click, click of the solenoid. The battery was dead. Harriet, upon reaching the windscreen, floated momentarily, looking at the terrified face staring at her. Then she smiled. Harley, not knowing what to make of it, returned the smile. It was the only thing he could think of what to do. But when Harriet floated to the outside of the passenger door, then passed through the glass and entered the cabin, Harley knew instinctively what he had to do. Flinging open the door, he ejected himself from the seat and hit the ground scrambling, gained his feet and made to take off toward the rear of the utility, only to find Harriet waiting for him. In a panic he turned round and dashed toward his friends with Harriet close behind, herding him to where she wanted him to be. With the full complement now together, Harriet took up her position to the right of her mother, and from there mother and twin daughters looked down at the cringing congregation. To those on the ground all huddled together, each passing moment of such intense scrutiny seemed to last an eternity, totally unaware as they were as to what was going to happen. They were, however, well aware of two things: their shortcomings, particularly those of their patriarch, the one they thought was fearless and without fault and could do anything, but had proved to be anything but, and the terrible stench that was Harley Sloane, of which Harley himself was more than well aware. Yet to distance himself from him was something not one was prepared to do, for to their minds such movement might result in an action far worse than the stomach-churning smell that assailed them. By the time Henrietta began to speak, the group had managed to compose themselves, but only just. "You will not from this time," she said, "indulge in such obnoxious behaviour ever again. Your outrageous noise has once too often woken those yonder," pointing to the east in the direction to where Sandy and Clyde fished. She raised her voice and said, "See, look now at what you have done." And they did, and what they saw scared and overwhelmed them. But only a short time ago there had been nothing but darkness, with now a scene of immense illumination. "Those," Henrietta said, "are the army of lost souls your devil noise has brought forth, and they are angry at me to haunt you for ever and a day, if you do not mend your ways." To Harley, a dyed-in-the-wool science fiction nut, the sight before him was like that in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where the immense mothership had opened the hatch, bathing the landing area in brilliant white light. And these, the lost souls, were the aliens wandering about. But unlike the aliens whose purpose was to make contact, these seemed to have no purpose other than to display their numbers. And their numbers frightened him. So many, he thought. So many. To Shana, though, the sight of the spirits, seemingly so forlorn, made her heart ache for them, and she wept, a defining moment in the life of one so young. And as she looked at Shane, she saw him in a totally different light, and she promised herself she had nothing further to do with him once this ordeal was over. For all, in fact, it was a wake-up call that was so desperately needed. For all had a sudden awareness of their own mortality, and with it was a time for change. "You have been warned," Harriet said. "The rest is up to you." When the fluorescent tube flickered into life, it was the only light in the area, the way it was and had always been. But for the first time for this gathering, it brought comfort. The encounter had shaken them to the very core of their existence, and left an indelible impression in their hearts and minds that they would always feel and never forget. However, no one felt like talking, for there was nothing that really needed to be said. Instead, they just glanced from one to the other as they mulled about, and gradually distancing themselves from Harley. Shana expected Shane to find his voice and ridicule Harley, but he didn't. Perhaps there was hope for him yet, she thought. Brittany found herself close to Darrell and welcomed his presence. Perhaps he wasn't as bad as she thought he was. And she was looking better and better all the time in Darrell's eyes. Cheryl and Alyssa found themselves drawn to each other, and neither was surprised. Paul, Wayne and Doug swore an oath to each other they would never drink again. But the satisfaction they gained from the cigarettes they smoked was one crutch too many to throw away for the present. Shane was in too many minds to know what the future had in store for him. But loud music and late nights would no longer be a part of it. He was certain about that. Harley at the moment had but one thing on his mind, and that was to take advantage of a nearby tap, even though he wasn't optimistic about the outcome. Nor was he optimistic about cleaning up the mess in his utility. But any thought they might have had about driving home, they could forget, for the spirit world was as much against drink driving as the police were, and they had the power to prevent it. And besides, a long walk home on a cool November night would clear their heads and galvanise their resolves, even though Harley hadn't had time to consider any resolves as yet. Before retiring for the night, Clyde was standing before the kitchen sink drinking a glass of cool tank water as he looked out the window. He had thought about the sisters while watching television, but had no expectations that they would make an appearance to give the thumbs up, so to speak. Final goodbyes had been said early last Sunday morning, and sadly they were gone forever, but never to be forgotten. Or so he thought. After draining the glass, he rinsed it out and placed it upside down on the dish rack. His attention on his action for only a few seconds, but long enough for him to be greeted with the sight of Harriet and Henrietta close together on the outside looking in when he raised his head. He smiled straight away and they reciprocated. Their faces, he thought, although seemingly impossible, more beautiful and serene than they were Sunday morning. But there was something different about them as well. They had a glow in and about them that was golden, like that of a setting sun, that radiated a vitality that wasn't there before, and that Clyde could actually feel himself. And somehow he knew what it represented. "It's time for you to go to the other side," Clyde said, his voice full of emotion. "Yes," Henrietta said, "it's time." Clyde noticed golden tears in her eyes, and he felt tears well in his eyes too. "Don't be sad, Clyde," Harriet said, blinking away her tears, "for this is a joyous occasion, and one we have yearned for so long. And remember, we'll be waiting for you and Sandy when your time comes. So look upon this, not as a final farewell, but a brief parting until we meet again." With utmost sincerity, Clyde said, "I will look forward to that. I will look forward to that very, very much. And as we can now rest easy, so to you," Henrietta said. "For those who had once been the harbingers of aggravation have now mended their ways." "Thank you," Clyde said. "Goodbye, Clyde Phillimore," Harriet and Henrietta said in unison. And as they slowly drew away toward their new beginning, both chorused, "Until we meet again, Clyde Phillimore. Until we meet again." And then they were gone, but not forever. Clyde had arranged to meet Sandy at his front gate 9 o'clock Saturday morning. Although neither had witnessed the supernatural event, both wanted to visit the site as a matter of interest. They had no idea what they expected to see, if anything, nor did they know if they would recognise whatever it was if they did. Sandy and Alma's house was located on the corner of Camp and Lawson Streets, 2 blocks north of Clyde's house. Across Camp Street, directly opposite the front northeast corner of the front fence, a dirt track snaked its way through the Natural Bush Reserve, leading all the way to the large area of flat open ground that led to the south bank of the Trafalgar River. Sandy had walked this track countless times over the years, and for him, Clyde was the shortest way to the river reserve parking area. "I had a visit from the sisters last night," Clyde said to Sandy as they walked. "Then they assured me the deed had been done and the noise would be a thing of the past." "Really?" Sandy said. "I thought they'd gone forever." "Well, they have now." "Well, good for them. Too bad they won't be around when other dickheads take over where that bunch of morons left off." It was something Clyde hadn't considered. "I never thought of that," he said. "But I suppose you're right." "Of course I'm right. But with any luck it won't happen for a while. And by then I'll probably be able to turn my hearing aid off and give them the finger." Either that or I'll be dead. And then it won't matter. Now will it? No. No, I guess it won't. For a couple of minutes they walked in silence. And Sandy said, "You haven't received that ground thingamabob yet, have you?" "No, but I'm not surprised. You send them a bank cheque and still they wait until it's cleared." "I would too," Sandy said, "considering how much it's worth." Clyde nodded. It was a fair statement. Changing the subject, he said, "So when's Alma heading off overseas?" "Next Wednesday. I got to drive her to Dubbo Airport early that morning so she can catch the connecting flight. You want to come along for the ride?" "Nah, I don't think so. I want to be here in case the delivery arrives." "Fair enough," Sandy said. Stepping from the dirt track onto the grass that was the surface of the river reserve, Clyde and Sandy noticed the 5 vehicles off in the distance to their left straight away. There wasn't, as far as they could see, anyone near them. In fact, there wasn't anyone anywhere. "What do you reckon happened?" Sandy asked. "Don't know, but I'll hazard a guess. I reckon the sisters put the fear of God in them so much that they weren't game enough to drive." "Either that or they're crammed in the back of them utilities sleeping it off," Sandy said. "How cosy," Clyde said sarcastically. 5 minutes later, "Looks like you're all right, Clyde." Looking around, Clyde said, "Just look at all the empty beer cans lying about, for Christ's sake. I tell you, Sandy, I hope the mongrels live a long way off if they were forced to walk home." Sandy chuckled. "Maybe they're still walking if that were the case." Clyde chuckled too. Wouldn't that be a jolt to their systems? Sandy and Clyde gave the vehicles in the immediate area final going over, then headed off toward the town centre. Sandy needed to buy tobacco and papers and Clyde needed a few grocery items. 10 minutes later, and from his position to the front of the supermarket, Clyde noticed a sign in the front window of the cafe. He couldn't read it from that distance, but he had an awful feeling as to why it was there. Louise had resigned and gone away. "I'll be back in a minute or two, Sandy," Clyde said, already in motion. Of course, Sandy thought. Sometimes I wonder if he has a cape and suit under his clothes and dashes off looking for a nearby phone booth. "Ah, yes, Louise," Sid Locke said matter-of-factly, after Clyde's inquiry as to her whereabouts. Sid reminded Clyde of Harold Holt. "She handed in her notice Monday of last week, bold as brass, she was. Said she was going away for a while. Picked up her pay and entitlements an hour later and was gone." Clyde was stunned. "I would never have expected her to do something like that," he said, his wavering voice testimony to his feelings. "Nor did we," Mary Locke said suddenly at her husband's side. Mary reminded Clyde of Harpo Marx. "You could have knocked me over with a feather when she resigned so abruptly, I can tell you. Isn't that right, Sid?" "Yes, and it's so out of character. Makes me wonder if she's gotten herself into trouble. You know?" Mary Locke nodded her head. It was obviously something she had considered too. Clyde, however, refused to think that of Louise, but he didn't say so. "Oh, before I forget," Mary said, "Louise left an envelope for you, Mr. Phillimore. I'll just go and get it." "I've known Louise since her early teens," Sid said as they waited for Mary's return. "And a finer lass you'd never meet. So I sure hope everything works out for her." Clyde hoped so too. Another sticky page. "There you go, Mr. Phillimore," Mary said, handing him the white envelope. "Perhaps there's a letter in there that will let you know what we don't." Her tone was free of innuendo and Clyde liked that. For the last thing he wanted was to be expected to tell all. Not that he would under any circumstances. After thanking Sid and Mary, Clyde took his leave, only to be halted when he reached the front door by Mary Locke asking, "We can still expect to see you every Monday for lunch, can't we?" Clyde was hesitant for a moment and said, "I should think so, yes, but not for a few weeks because I'll be away." He wasn't sure as he turned his back on the couple if that was a lie or not. Sandy was waiting patiently, his back against the supermarket display window, smoking when Clyde joined him. "Louise has gone," he blurted out. "Can you believe that?" "Stone the crows," Sandy said incredulously. "That is hard to believe. Be damned if it ain't. She left an envelope for me, but I'll wait until I get home before opening it. Do you mind if I'm there when you do?" "No, not at all." Half an hour later, seated as usual opposite each other at Clyde's kitchen table, a mug of tea before each, Clyde opened the envelope while Sandy rolled a smoke. Then he began to read. That's it. Another cliffhanger, as my dear friend Colleen would say. Oh, I want to thank you for watching, and until next time, bye for now.